Good morning. I hope you all are doing well. My name is Lindsay Mason, and I am a sign language interpreter in education, and I've been working as a K-12 interpreter for the last 13 years. I am really excited to present to you guys today. As you know, I was contracted with Turner School District, where you guys work, and to report on a comprehensive communication assessment for a deaf student at one of your middle schools. A little introduction. Like I said, I was contracted with your school district, and so I did a comprehensive communication assessment report over a 3-week period of time. So in that 3 weeks, I completed 4 stages of observations. Stage number one, I observed, documented, and assessed the school environment where Raylin, the deaf student, went to school. Stage number two, I consulted with the service providers that provide services for Raylin. Stage number three, develop strategies for interpreting. Stage number four, final recommendations. So we'll go through each one of those stages and talk about them in a little bit more detail. The purpose of my presentation today is to not only talk about what we can do to improve interpreting services, educational future services for Raylin as a deaf student, but deaf students as a whole. I hope we can take some of the information that we learned today and apply that to other situations and students that we work with. But not only that, I really want to focus on how I can help all service providers, anyone that works and provides services with deaf students. So I really want you guys to know that when I completed this, I had just as much intention of you guys as much as the deaf student. So some of the people am referring to are the service providers, audiologists, SLP, OT. One of the students that I work with at my school district is deaf and does require PT services. So I did include that as well. You never know. So general education teachers, peers, classmates, administration, any other adult in the classroom, other paras, teacher assistants, student teachers, substitute teachers, every person pretty much in the school, janitors, cooking staff, bus staff, everyone, because not only will those students have gen ed teachers, they will see other teachers around the school before and after school, recess, lunch period, before and after school. So just really as a communicated community, that we will look at and how to support everyone. So I want to enhance the educational experience for the interpreting process, like I said. I want deaf students in Raylin to learn in the most successful situation with the least restrictive environment while we provide the best services as possible. A big thing I want to talk about today that's imperative is communication access in all types, in all forms, and we'll go into that a little bit more in a little bit. Some of the questions that we can ask: how is Raylin functioning in the classroom today? What are her strengths, her weaknesses, her goals? What are concerns and challenges? What can we do as a team to support Raylin overcome those challenges? And what strategies and recommendations do we have that are presented that we can work with? And what's next? How do we move forward with those? So this 4-stage report has furthered my knowledge and understanding and kind of put everything together in the perspective of aspects of classroom communication. And I hope you guys can learn as much as I did. I also wanted to know if you guys have any questions or feedback and you don't want to wait till the end, that's perfectly fine. I don't want you to forget those questions. Feel free to stop me anytime. All right, a little bit of background. So Raylin is a 6th grade female deaf student at Beckham Middle School. This is her first year in middle school. She transferred from a K-5 elementary school. The information that we'll be discussing today will reflect her progress from 6th to 7th grade. She is a non-native ASL user, and ASL is her language preference. She's profound bilateral hearing loss and utilizes interpreter throughout her day. She has 2 cochlear implants, which she's had since a very young age. The implants do significantly improve her hearing, especially related to her hearing and noise test scores. She's very task oriented, very much a rule follower, as her interpreter told me, but she is shy. She uses ASL with her interpreter, but she uses her voice with everyone else. Her voice is pretty, you can understand what she's saying most of the time. Her parents know minimal sign language, but her younger sister, is starting to learn. So they do use minimal sign language at home. The interpreter that I observed as well, she has 12 years experience, and she in K-12 and VR services. Okay, so I want to talk next about the IEP plan. So a little bit first, when I did my observations and the 4 stages, I did 2 observations before I reviewed the IEP with Raylan's interpreter and teacher of the deaf. I wanted to kind of step back and see the whole situation alone without having any perspective of what goals she already has set in place. So that was really, I think, a really good plan of mine, because I was able to step back, see and observe what I thought were maybe some good goals for her, and then having 2 different experiences in 2 different classrooms, and then sit down with her service providers provided me an awesome experience doing that. And I could really see how the connection with what I observed related to her IEP. So like I said, I met with the TOD and interpreter that Raylan works with. Raylan does receive special education services for her hearing loss. She faces a lot of obstacles to have equal access to grade level curriculum or to make adequate academic progress. Her hearing loss causes delay in speech and language skills, which impacts her ability to successfully demonstrate her knowledge and build relationships with peers and adults. The teacher of the deaf let me know that to solely rely on her hearing through her cochlear implant would not allow her to accessible and be physically and mentally exhausting for her. She receives specialized instructions and services from a state certified educational interpreter. Raylan's current IE plan and objectives increase my understandings of her abilities and how they align with the park form and district forms that I use, which I will show you in a little bit. Her IEP goals. Number 1, she increases her grade level literacy text assessments. Number 2, demonstrate understanding of grade level writing. Number 3, increase grade level mathematical problem solving skills. Number 4, demonstrate independence of self-advocacy skills. 5, increase basic reading through phonics and decoding skills. 6, communicate effectively with her peers and adults in academic and social settings. And 7, increase ability to access curricular instruction without a sign language interpreter. All right, so stage number 1, observation, documentation, and assessment. So we are going to go through a few of these steps that I went through within stage 1. So the observation details. So like I said, I observed Raylan over a 3-week period of time during her science and math classes. I took many notes, used many different forms, which I'll talk about in a little bit. I really noticed a strong rapport that she had with her interpreter and her math teacher. I had a challenging time navigating how her relationship was with her science teacher. It could be great. I'm not sure. I'm assuming it's great. The reason I couldn't necessarily make that decision was because her math class was very different from her science class. Math class was very laid back and kind of raise your hand and just say your answer without being called on. Science was very formal, very quiet, no talking unless you're called on. So I just didn't see a lot of interaction. They, stayed sitting the whole time. And so what I did notice though is almost every question that the teacher asked, Raylan would answer her would raise her hand to answer and be very excited about it. So that does tell me that she does feel comfortable and trust her peers and her teacher in that environment. I did notice, and I asked with the interpreter how if she had many friends, how her social, um, how she socializes with her peers. And she did say that she does have one really close friend that she went to elementary school with. So she is still needing to improve in the social area. Some research that I've completed stated during the interviews, so they did interviews with teachers and general education teachers and how they worked with their deaf students. So during the interviews, both teachers emphasized that the inclusion is for all students, not just for those who previously were in special education. Everyone is as much part of the team and learning environment as anyone else. Everyone just feels like respecting people for who they are. Everyone has a need. This is the community. This is important. Ideas behind individualized instruction extended beyond the deaf students and applied to every student regardless of their hearing level. So I really think the students had that connection with their general education teachers that I can notice from all students, just the feel that I got. And I can tell that that's their what they're striving for at that school. The teachers were really great. So I wanted to point that out with that quote that I found. So the method I took when completing these stages was a lot of notes, a lot of note taking, which I have compiled and put together. There's a PARC form, which I will talk about in a minute and gives you more detail on what that looks like. Interpreter feedback, a demand control schema template. The district that I worked for, we use a deaf and hard of hearing itinerant service rubric form. So all of these I will explain and go into detail of what they mean and the letters, what they stand for, and all this if you're not familiar. And to supplement all of these findings, I did use Braylon's IEP, and I think that plays a huge role in this. So I did collaborate as well, like I mentioned, with the teacher of the deaf and the interpreter, compiled everything together, and now I'm able to understand the classroom interpreters serve as an extension of the teacher's intentions related to curriculum, instruction, and learning goals. I witnessed how an interpreter matched teacher intention to increase academic growth and future education for deaf students. So some of the discourse that I saw in my observations. So first I wanted to start with a quote. Deaf and hard of hearing college students don't always understand science lectures and topics. Every student is different and has strengths in various subjects, but I was happy to see Braylon exceed in science. She has a colorful ASL were the side conversations that she had with her interpreter. So go to a little bit more about that. Raylan had a great relationship with her all three teachers. And like I said, with her science teacher, I could tell, even though they didn't have this direct interaction. So that was really great to see. So first I can talk about a little bit about math class. So in their math class, they were talking about integers, um, different wording and math equations. One of the examples was airplane descends 37,000 feet and how they would write that in mathematical terms and numbers. And is that increase or is that decreasing? And so those were the kind of things that they were working on. And one example of what they did in class, they are more of, like I said, a hands-on activity class. And so they were going on a scavenger hunt. So I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. I want to touch on science real fast. So their science class was very interesting. They were talking about glaciers and corrosion and landforms and icebergs, and she used a lot of the comparisons to an iceberg is very similar to a bulldozer. So I saw some amazing classifier uses, just very conceptual visual language from Raylan's interpreter and from Raylan. They were going to a back and forth exchange, and you could just tell Raylan was so excited and really interested in the content. And even at one point, her interpreter had to be like, "Okay, we need to move on with the conversation and get back to the lecture." So that was just really great to see, especially knowing that science is a hard, more challenging subject for students in general. So I wanted to talk first, excuse me, we'll go back and talk about the environment. So her math class was, both classrooms are pretty small. Her math class was a little bit more spread out, and Raylan, her seat in both classrooms were pretty much the same. So she was right in the center, in the middle of the classroom, which, before I started my interpreting career, I would always be like, front and center, that's the best place for students that are deaf. And I'm realizing that that's not best case scenario for them, because they're front and they can see the teacher and the interpreter, but they can see anything behind them. They're going to miss non-content communication, which we'll talk about. They're going to miss conversations with their peers. They're going to feel left out. So front, or middle, maybe to the side, but not in the front row. Okay, so some information about non-contact communication. We all have a great deal of research making it clear that communities, families, and individual values functions differently and means of realizing them differently. For example, one family might highly value heuristic language, explaining and speculating intellectually, whereas another hardly ever uses that function. One family may value indirectness over directness, and another one vice versa. Thus, not only does the function itself, but the means of achieving the function should be analyzed. So a little bit more about non-content information. So I'm going to kind of give you a general view because we're going to touch on this in the strategies and where I saw content not being accessed. So non-content communication is all the things that happen in the classroom that are not verbally come from the teacher. So not the content that is lectured. It's, whatever the teacher is saying, not always what they aren't saying. So, for example, if the teacher is having a side conversation with a student, that is non content communication. If the teacher is lecturing to everybody, that is content communication. So, a lot of times, interpreters, and I know for me, when I started, I wasn't aware that there was a label for that, or really necessary that all those things needed to be interpreted. So, anywhere from the side conversation to in the science room, someone was washing their hands. The science room also had a class pet of a dog, that was moving around and, making some small noises. If there's noises in the hallway, the phone rings in the classroom, the bell rings, things like that. And it's very imperative that all non content communication is interpreted. All right, so theory of mind. So, theory of mind is an important social cognitive skill that involves the ability to think about mental states, both your own and those of others. It encompasses the ability to attribute mental states, including emotions, desires, beliefs, and knowledge. Not only does the theory of mind involve thinking about thinking, it but it also refers to the ability to understand that other people's thoughts and beliefs may be different from your own and to consider the factors that have led to those mental states. So this was a great thing to incorporate in my observations, because it's so crucial. If a student doesn't have a theory of mind from a young age, it's very critical that that gets passed on into their educational learning. And I won't touch on it too much because I noticed that Raylan has a great theory of mind. You can tell that she understands these things, she understands what other people are saying. The only thing, and this kind of goes along with non content communication, is learning the routines and how a classroom functions. For example, her science room was very more formal, raising your hand, no talking until that you're raised, until you're answered. Where her math class was, she asked a question, they raise their hand, but they also can call out. So just learning those different routines, and being that Raylan is her first year in middle school, new teachers, new classrooms, finding her way in a huge school. These kind of functions and routines have to be learned. All right, stage number 2, I consulted with service providers, including Raylan's interpreter and her teacher of the deaf. So the first form I used was called the PARC form, which stands for Placement and Readiness Checklist. So after going through this form, the form I'm going to talk about next, it really aligns and is cohesive to her IEP goals and what I observed. Most everything lined up pretty well. There are a few places where there was a little bit of disagreement with what I saw and what some of the answers that we were collaborating on with her teacher, the deaf and interpreter. But I'll talk about that in a minute. So I didn't realize that Raylan was about 2 to 3 years below her academic grade level for reading, math, and writing. So this directly correlates with a statement that I found in Deaf Cognition. If students are able to interact successfully with their instructors and peers, they will have more access to academic cognitive tools. So this is something I really wanted to touch on because many of the things that she struggles with has to do with her self-advocacy skills. I think if she could self-advocate for herself, if she can feel confident in asking teachers for questions, asking her peers for questions, it will help in so many different ways academically. So here's just a couple pictures. The PARC form is 11 pages. This is a picture of the first and last page. I know it's hard to see. I just wanted to kind of give you guys a little visual of how it's set up. This is the other form I used, and I really highly relied on this form. It's called the Hearing Itinerant Service Rubric. And basically, it is the PARC form just very condensed. So we use this at my school district. And a lot of the questions you see here are on the PARC form, maybe a little bit of wording and just a little bit easier to process. However, I think the PARC form is very extensive and required, especially for a new student that you're not familiar with, new student coming into the district, moving schools, things like that. I can suggest if you guys haven't used the PARC form, you could start maybe with the itinerant service rubric and make your way there, or start with that one and do the hearing itinerant service rubric going forward, yearly or semesters. So that's kind of up to you. So like I said, Raylan's self-advocacy skills are, she needs to work on those. And I really think it would cause a ripple effect to all the things that we will talk about here. So just real quickly, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but so her classroom routine, she is able to follow a classroom routine pretty independently. She does need to watch her peers and see what they're doing exactly and kind of look around and follow what they're doing. So a little bit of improvement is needed there. Her classroom instruction, like I said, her interpreter told me that she's very much a rule follower, and so she does follow the rules and the instruction as long as she understands them. She does need a little bit help if things are unfamiliar, not in order, or set up that way that she's familiar with. So this is where I had a little bit of contradiction with the service providers. From what I noticed, her whole class participation was great. I saw her raising her hand on almost every question in both classes and felt really confident and excited to answer. Whereas they thought that she did raise her hand, but didn't really give the correct information when she did raise her hand or the right answer. But I think as long as she's raising her hand and participating, like she will get there. But from what I saw, she was answering on topic. The small group participation is also where we didn't coincide. And so what I had seen in my observations, for example, they had a small group math work time and she wasn't really interacting with her peers. I noticed that she wasn't sitting next to her friend. And then they also went to the library to do a little bit of their work from her math class. And the students can sit wherever they want. So a lot of them were sitting with their friends and at tables or different places. And Raylan chose to sit in the corner and sat on the floor and just kind of away in this corner of computers. So I did notice that. And while she was there in that example, she was frustrated. Not because she was secluded, I think that was her choice, but she didn't want to ask for help. And it was clear that she was needing help, that she was frustrated in what she was working on. And she asked her interpreter for help, and her interpreter said, I will love to help you, but you need to ask your classroom teacher first. We really, and this is what her interpreter stressed, want to step away from the helper interpreter model. And of course, if something's needed right then, or what, if it's more of a language barrier, that can be interpreted. But everything needs to be independent with her and her general ed teacher. She can ask her peers. Like I said, she's very you can understand her. She has her voicing, and so it's nice to have the interpreter right there next to her in case some questions come along that are confusing, that needs more explanation in ASL. But so her self-advocacy skills are just like, again, can apply to all of these. Academic performance, like I talked about, she is undergrade level, and she's got some really great plans set in her IEP goals to address that. Her language skills and auditory skills, she relies a lot on the interpreter. Some of the numbers that were in her forms that we filled out, that she relies 25% on teacher instruction and 75% on the interpreter. Stage number 3, develop strategies for interpreting. So I'm going to touch on these just lightly because we're going to dig a lot deeper in the next slide in stage number 4, going into how we will address these. So this report provides viable strategies supported by research along with clearly stated rationale for recommendations. So non-content communication, optimum classroom environment, theory of mind, demand control schema, interpreting skills, service provider involvement, and all the strategies that go along with those. Final recommendations in stage 4. So the first strategy was related to interpreting services and advocacy. So as an interpreter, I'm going to discuss the scenario that I touched on a little bit before about Raylan's math class. So one of her assignments was to go on a scavenger hunt. They had to find pieces of paper with math problems, and then where they returned them, they would find another piece of paper that led them to another location in the school. So started in the math classroom, went down the hall, all the way to the front office, all the way to the library, all over the school on opposite ends. Raylan was clearly confused on how this was started. It's not structured like she's used to, and it involves a lot of socializing, and it says on the directions, ask your peers for help first. And that even goes another element to Raylan, because she's really trying to ask the teacher, not her interpreter, for help. And so asking a peer is another, if she's unfamiliar with the friend, that's another step that she will need to overcome. So during the scavenger hunt, Raylan could have asked her teachers or friends or peers for help. And best case scenario, she could ask them. She was clear and understood. Communication was executed, and her interpreter wasn't needed. However, her interpreter decided not to follow her in this activity. And I fully support the helper model, don't support the helper model. So I support her decision in not going because of wanting to avoid the helper model. However, I believe that her interpreter in this situation should have gone with her just to be near. Self-advocacy is obviously one of her major goals, and she needs to be encouraged to ask her peers or her teacher. But she may be a little apprehensive to ask those peers and her teacher if she's feeling not confident in that she will be understood. So having the interpreter nearby to interpret if she's needed, if she gets an answer that she doesn't understand that needs to be interpreted in ASL, just it's the best case scenario for the interpreter to be near. Um, let's see. So yep, that's what I talked about there. So another one of her IEP goals states that she understands information better when they're structured and with familiar text. And like I said, this was very unstructured and something new for her. Another strategy that could be enforced would be set a plan with the gen ed teacher ahead of time. The teacher could take the initiative in asking Raelians if she needs help and has a question. And I think this would be great. It seemed like the teachers were very open and very interactive with the deaf students in that school. And so just asking if maybe the teachers could, you know, encourage them and ask them, hey, do you have a question first? And doing this enough until they can start stepping back and letting the deaf student ask themselves for help from the teacher. So the theory of mind concern that I had, so like I kind of touched on this ahead of time. Learning the classroom routines and discussing the norms of the classroom would help Raylan, and knowing the theory of mind, the non-contact communication of how that classroom functions on a daily basis. So a strategy for this would be to have those conversations with their teachers ahead of time, either just the interpreter or the teacher and deaf and the teacher and the classroom teacher, whatever is works best for that team. I think just to have that set in place that she could be a little bit more familiar with it going in, especially from coming from a new school. Okay, so interpreter skills for strategy number 3. It's very important that the interpreter skills in ASL match what is needed for that deaf student. In this case, it was a perfect match. It provides a cohesive and less restrictive learning environment if both parties can be understood. There's lots of implication for language for interpreters in public school settings. Overall, Raylan's interpreter has a high level skill and has a lot of experience in K-12. It did seem like she had some management of information confusion, didn't speak from her own agency to clarify meaning or some of the concepts during the instruction. We collaborated after, and she wasn't familiar. She had heard of theory of mind. She didn't know really what it meant. She never heard of non-contact communication, but when I explained the meaning, she said yes, of course. She didn't know it had a label. And demand control schema with finding demands in the classroom, like there's a bright light, I need to shut the blinds or move or adjust, and finding different controls, which are different decisions that could be made. There was at one point where the interpreter didn't interpret a side conversation that was happening in science class, and I did ask her about that, and she said she normally does do all side conversation and non-contact communication, so that was an error on her part. We didn't go into a lot of theory of mind. Like I said, she had heard of it, but since we already conveyed that Raylan has a strong theory of mind, we did touch on it a little bit. There were a couple demands that I noticed that she didn't respond to. It's just really hard to know what is going on with that demand constellation. So, for example, there was some loud students in the hallway, and I didn't see the teacher or the interpreter being bothered by it. I could hear it by sitting back and observing, but there may have been some very important information going on that time, and maybe they weren't hearing it. Maybe they noticed it wasn't bothering Raylan, other students, things like that. A big concern for mine was having all service providers involved. Um, so, like I said, I want everyone to be a part of this success and this report and information that can help you moving forward. So the teacher of the deaf support, so the teacher of the deaf for Raylan is also her case manager. That teacher of deaf is also managing 19 multi-categorical eighth grade students. So that is just a lot. And additionally to her 4 deaf and hard of hearing 6th through 8th grade students as well that are on a very different spectrum of academic needs and levels. So this is a critical piece in the team dynamic. I did notice that the teacher of the deaf has one class with Raylan, and it was a study hall where Raylan most of the time worked by herself there. So one of the strategies that I could see helping this situation is that they have a set one-on-one teacher of the deaf, her case manager with Raylan per week, and that could have a direct language model for her, which I think is vital. A good thing is that they are hiring an additional teacher of the deaf who is actually deaf himself for next school year. So I was really happy to hear that. And another multi-cat teacher as well. So that will help in that case immensely. Another strategy was just to provide all service support for the deaf students. And for example, I witnessed the speech language pathologist grab Raylan to go to a one-on-one session, and they were both really excited about it. The only concern that I saw was the SLP or the interpreter didn't say, "Hey, should I come with you? Do you need interpreting?" And I don't even think that should have been said. I think she just should have gone with. And I do understand their desire and confidence that they want the one-on-one. It's probably a good break for Raylan to have from her interpreter and vice versa. But I really think again that if she doesn't have access to ASL at all times, then she could see her speech regressing. Let's see. So her service providers, I talked a little bit about that. If students are able to interact successfully with their instructors and peers, they'll have more access to academic cognitive tools, which is very, very true in the situation and in most situations with deaf students as well. So another possibility for a strategy for this would be having training for all staff in the schools, district-wide if people are interested, and understanding theory of mind, non-contact communication, DCS, and really just getting to know what the deaf students need and how they best can be supported. Some general strategies that I saw, we touched on a lot of these already. Focus the relationship on the instructional process with the IEP and the consideration of the process of classroom discourse at the level of professional preparation. Increase the knowledge of cultural aspects, open-ended questioning, identify the barriers that you're seeing, the communication pace, if that can slow down, the interpreter would have more time to relay the information, which then would allow Raylan to participate and understand more classroom routines and work. Having the teachers being responsible for educational program and not the interpreter. If classroom teachers, interpreters, and the TOD, all service providers would collaborate and evaluate and discuss appropriate goals for her IEP. Time constraints could be a lot of the issues that many teachers are willing and want to talk about and figure out plans to overcome those challenges that they are seeing. Social peer interactions, encouraging, Raylan and deaf students to socialize with their peers and, step out of their comfort level and get in those situations. So, in conclusion, this comprehensive communication assessment was a wonderful and great learning experience for me, and I'm so honored to have the opportunity to complete this for your school district. So thank you for allowing me to do so and for me to present the information that I learned. Another quote that I wanted to read. So teachers directed fewer utterances on average to deaf than to a hearing student, but showed different language patterns on the remaining measures. Inclusive philosophies focus on an individualized approach to teaching, attention to deaf culture, advocacy, smaller size classes, and an openness to diversity in the classroom. The interpreter's role in the classroom included translating teacher speech, voicing student sign language, mediating communication between deaf students and their peers, and monitoring overall classroom behavior. So that just kind of gives some of the examples from outside resources that I found of how to better support students in their classroom that are deaf. Again, I wanted to talk about the IEP. I really feel strongly. I wanted to talk about how it's not black and white, and I didn't even notice my when I was putting this together. I already said IEPs are not black and white, and then I found this picture that I had already picked out that was all colorful. So I feel like that's exactly what the message is trying to be conveyed here, because the IEPs do not have to stay the same. Just because it says that this is the goal doesn't mean it's the right goal or it needs to be adjusted. So I just think it's so crucial to have all members of the service provider team for that student and anyone else who interacts with that student on a daily basis at school. So general education teachers, parents, of course, and everyone else that are involved. And I really think a big process for that would be meeting at the beginning of the school year, talk about what we're going to see the goals from the year prior and see if they're accurate. And then going in to the school year, documenting what you see. Are these goals the right fit for Raylan? Do they need to be changed or adjusted? And we need documentation supporting this. And I just think that is so important, and planning with the team, not just holding the IEP meeting and discussing it with the parents and having that one. There needs to be planning over time so they can hear from all members of the service team, especially interpreters. So that is my biggest strategy for this, because I think if we can get the IEP goals set in place and find one of those that's very prevalent that needs to be worked on, in Raylan's case, the self-advocacy skills, and those could be improved, I really think it would cause a ripple effect on her other goals that she has included in her plan. So next is like, what do we do now? What's next? How do we start this process? And I again just touched on the biggest belief that I had was her IEP goals, and the other part that is really great that I want to focus on is all the strategies that I discussed, but as well as having trainings for the staff. And I think there could be several different kind of trainings. There could be a whole staff training to touch on those terms of theory of mind and non-content communication and DCS, and what is the best way to support deaf students. And then we can have a more comprehensive dig deeper for a deaf and hard of hearing service provider team additional to that. So that is my suggestion and recommendations for you guys, and it all aligns with what I've been learning, all the research that I've been conducting, and I really think that is the best possible recommendations for now, starting for now. Those are the steps that we can start before really digging deeper to the strategies that we've discussed as well. So I'm really looking forward to discussing all of this with you further, and I'm happy to take your questions and feedback and perspectives. And I think all of this information, we all have the same goal in our mind. We want to work and have the most positive impact that we can with the interpreting process and deaf education. Thanks so much.